Hi everyone, I'm Elliot Milard. I'm Chief Strategy and Planning Officer at Wavemaker UK, and I'm really excited to be joined today by Nirav from Nextdoor. Nirav, do you want to just give a quick kind of overview of, I mean most people will know what Nextdoor is, but do you want to give a quick kind of 90-second overview of Nextdoor and the journey it's been on over the past few years?
I absolutely would love to, and Nextdoor is 14 years old this month, so I'm
this
feeling
month.
a little bit
Amazing.
nostalgic. Yeah, we started the company, founded it in June of 2010.
Oh, wow.
And it is the world's largest network for neighborhoods, a social media site that connects people on a local basis and builds community.
Amazing. And you, as a founder, so you were CEO for a long time.
Yes, I was one of the founders and the CEO for the first 9 years.
And then you went into chairman of the board.
And then I joined the board and stuck around, but I was in early retirement as an investor. And then 4 months ago, I've come back to run the company again as CEO.
So this, I think, is something really interesting because one of the things, we talk a lot about this as an industry, kind of like founders have this sort of amazing kind of sense, I think, within the industry. There's a sort of charisma and kind of vibe about founders. How's it been coming back into being CEO? Has that felt, because it's a different type of leadership, right? I guess I'm interested to explore a bit about kind of how
It's a bit of a refounding of the company after 9 years of running the company and then 5 years of observing the company as a board member. I'm back as an operator. And as I sat down to write my first letter to shareholders, I was doing some research and I ran across this very interesting book written by a couple of partners from the consulting firm Bain & Company. And the name of the book is called The Founder's Mentality. And I really resonated with what they had written about because as a founder, there's a particular way that you go about building a company. And the interesting thing about a founder's mentality is it doesn't just have to be at the beginning, the inception of a company. It can be a mentality that you have throughout the process of building, growing, and evolving the company. So what is the founder's mentality? There are three things to think about. The first is you have to have a very important and meaningful mission. They call it an insurgent mission, almost something that you are obsessed to accomplish. So in our case, we want to build community on a local level. We believe in the power of community, and we believe that that will make the world a better place. And that's propelled Nextdoor from the first day, and should propel it even now, 14 years later. The second thing is we have to pay very, very close attention to the details. We think the magic is in the details. So we're a technology company. We build a technology product. And if we really focus on those details and get them right, we believe that everything else will take care of itself. The third and final part of a founder's mentality is to always be thinking like an owner. So what does that mean? If you're an owner, you don't complain about working late. You don't complain about working on the weekends. You treat every penny like it's your own. There's a different kind of mentality when you're an owner than when you're an employee. Now in Silicon Valley, because most everyone has stock options, we are literally owners, and we need to treat the company that way.
So I completely, I think a lot of these things are things that I think we all are trying to bring to life in our own businesses, right? And certainly from a planning perspective, one of the things I talk to the team about a lot is that sense of be focused on the details, never let anything slip, get right in, because it's important, right? The thing I guess I want to talk about more is that sense of mission, because 14 years ago when you founded Nextdoor, the world, we're in Cannes, everyone talks about kind of the pace of change and all those kind of things, but the world was quite different. And it feels as though, certainly in the UK, but I think this is true everywhere, there's been a real resurgence of like local and community, and that sense that actually during the pandemic, people really rediscovered their kind of local community. How's that? That feels like that should be hugely beneficial for Nextdoor, right?
Well, it's a great comment because it has been 14 years, and while the mission is the same, the execution against that mission and where the world is, that needs to evolve the same way that the world has. So as we sit back and look at Nextdoor today, in the US, we're in 1 of 3 households. In the UK, 1 of 4. In London, 1 of 3. So pretty well penetrated. Over 90 million verified neighbors who have joined Nextdoor. So clearly, there is some desire to build local community, and we've taken advantage of that. But how do we do that through the product? And that's where the world has really changed. We started the company pre-COVID. We started the company before people were thinking about working away from the office. We started the company before the world was as divided, frankly, as it is today. And so there has been a resurgence of this idea of what is home to me? What is local? What does that actually mean? But its importance has only grown. And that's what we're trying to take advantage of.
And the division thing, I think, is super interesting, right? And US, UK, both going through some pretty tough political times at the moment, right? Election year, it's pretty brutal out there. One of the things I think is really interesting about Nextdoor is that it is, and I want to talk about whether you are a social platform in a second, because I think this is also really interesting. But one of the things I think is really interesting about it is that it's an online platform that's driving in real life connections. And that feels, I think, in a time when things are becoming more divided, actually I think one of the things we learned during COVID was the importance of those like IRL connections. How are you kind of leaning into that as a space?
Well, increasingly I think we're learning that social media is not all good. Social media does have a tendency to keep us looking at our phones versus going out and meeting people in the real world. And when we meet people in the real world, it's kind of hard to be divided. Right? We are together both physically, right? And then we start to come together because of that physical connection. Nextdoor has always been about using the online medium to drive offline connections. So success for us is not endlessly scrolling and staying inside and just being on your screen the entire time. Success for us is getting to know one of your neighbors online, because frankly, we don't know our neighbors offline the same way we did. Completely. So if we can bring you that convenience of getting to know your neighbor online, but then propel you to meet with that neighbor offline, that's success for us. So we are quite different than the typical social media platforms. We call ourselves social media because it is a community. It is a place where neighbors are creating the majority of the content. It is a news feed. It has some of those conventions. But the end state of Nextdoor is not mindlessly scrolling over and over and over again. The end state is using the product to get into your neighborhood and connect with people in the real world.
So this is a thing I think was just a conversation I wanted to have with you, because I think the social, from an advertising perspective, we tend to put all social platforms in a little box and call it social. And I think increasingly as they feel like they are diverging. Like TikTok doesn't feel like Instagram, it doesn't play the same role in people's lives. And Nextdoor feels like it plays a very different role in people's lives. And I guess from an advertiser perspective, it feels like the secret sauce of Nextdoor is not really about, like, you're not replacing another social media platform on the plan. You're doing a totally different thing, but it feels like that needs to be. We need to elevate the conversations we're having with Nextdoor to create the best work.
It is social and familiar because we have lots of users. It is one of the distribution platforms where advertisers can find audiences, but it's different because it's local and it's about community. So local is a strategy for advertisers. They want to reach people on a regional, citywide, zip code, or even a neighborhood basis. And Nextdoor is absolutely the best place to do that. But I think when you talk about elevating, we think about elevating to this idea of community. Because most of traditional social media makes us feel more alone. It makes us feel more isolated. Nextdoor is the opposite. When you join Nextdoor, you don't build your friend graph. You immediately are a part of a vibrant neighborhood. You are part of a community without doing anything on your own. And so from an advertiser standpoint, when an advertiser says our values align with the human value of community, that's where Nextdoor is truly differentiated and unique.
And I would assume that comes with a load of other benefits. So more trusted, we all know there are some challenges with trust in the social space, and indeed trust in the kind of general mainstream news space. But actually Nextdoor, because it's community controlled, right? It's a community controlled platform. It's a community owned, well, not owned, but you know what I mean? It's that my community is devised and driven by my local community. That feels like it's a very different
when we think of consumption, it's one thing to be advertised to. But in general, I think people like hearing from the people they trust, the people around them, what products and services they should try. We call that word of mouth. For the longest time, it's word of mouth. Nextdoor is a way of bringing that local word of mouth online. So it's very powerful because for brands, particularly those ones who've already earned positive sentiment in neighborhoods, they can launch advertising and neighbors will respond to it favorably, which will then make the neighbors who haven't tried those products and services want to try them and initiate trial and begin the process. But begin the process not in the, I've just seen an advertisement that looks interesting, but much more in a, I've just seen a product that my neighbors have endorsed, which makes me want to endorse it as well.
Yeah, and there's a really interesting, there's lots and lots of examples of this, but lots of car brands have played with that over the years. They've kind of gone, if I'm not a car expert, but if my neighbour has that car, it kind of must be a good car. That sort of implied advocacy, right? It's really powerful.
Well, there's an example that we've used in the car space. It's with Mazda as the client. And it's interesting because it's kind of an offline to online to offline again story. So if you think about what you've typically done in your neighborhood, you're walking around, you see a new car, you think to yourself, oh, that's kind of an interesting looking car. Is that a new model? I wonder if the person likes it. It looks a little interesting. Who's bought that? Who's my neighbor, et cetera, right? So Mazda did a campaign where they were introducing a new model. They introduced it online on Nextdoor. So that idea that in the real world, we are experiencing things, and we just want another way to experience them than online in a social media sense that we're very familiar with, but then that drives offline purchasing, that's an example of that.
That's lovely. And it feels actually very like sort of influencers without some of the baggage that influencers come with, whether we're talking, you know, credibility, authenticity, all those things. It's a kind of local, genuine community, people like me
the
are
most
making these
authentic
decisions.
endorsement is that I'm using it myself, right?
And, like
in
me
a
are making the same
neighborhood,
decision.
as you're walking by, you will see the things that your neighbors have chosen. And it's not because they're trying to gain audience on Instagram or YouTube. It's because that's the way that they've lived their lives.
Right?
Right?
It's a very different.
It's been their choice.
It's a very different experience to influencers kind of, you know, putting a hashtag ad at the end of something and kind of going, but I know they're doing it for likes on Instagram or views on TikTok or whatever. That local sense is a completely different.
Well, and I think that is the powerful thing about Nextdoor, which is at the end of the day, Nextdoor is not about the virtual world. It is about the real world. It is simply a virtual tool that makes us feel closer in the real world.
Yeah. And I guess, so one of the things you talked about was that idea of offline to online to offline again. One of the things, and I'm sure there'll be lots of discussion about this at Cannes this week, one of the things I think is, so a lot of the best work comes from multiple partners coming together and actually putting an idea at the heart of things, right? It feels like, and I can't think of someone who's done this in the UK, but you might have an example of someone who, or it might be an ambition. The idea of putting Nextdoor at the heart of, you know, there's no reason why that Mazda ad you talked about, that could have become a TV ad, or it could have been a poster campaign, because essentially you're taking influence and advocacy, and in this example you're kind of taking it from the real world into the digital world and then back out again. But that could have become a huge TV campaign, poster campaign, right? That would have been...
because Nextdoor is trying to drive this trial and consumption in the real world, the advertiser can use the campaign on Nextdoor as part of a larger proposition. So as an example, there's a candy brand, probably the most popular candy brand in America. It's called Brach's, B-R-A-C-H. And around springtime, and specifically Easter, they wanted to sell more candy. Of course, around Easter, you have more candy, right? So we did an activation on Nextdoor where we encourage neighbors to buy the candy and then proceed in a scavenger hunt around the neighborhood with kids. Lovely. And you could see that scavenger hunt not only taking place offline, but also being at a grocery store where they advertise the same kind of thing, on television, in radio, et cetera. And so the idea of using the online medium and other mediums that are more traditional to drive this kind of offline activity, that's something that I think is quite unique about Nextdoor, because in many cases, if you think about Instagram, lots of great ads for consumption, but typically you see the ad, you click buy, and then it shows up at your house. You've never gone into a store. You've never experienced any of it physically. It's all 100% virtual. Where Nextdoor is different, for any advertiser that exists in the real world, not just the virtual one, Nextdoor is a great choice.
Yeah, and I think there's something really interesting in a post-COVID world of real-world experiences. Like I want to, you know, we couldn't do it for a year, 18 months, however long. I actually want to go into a store. I want to have that kind of tangible, that's appealing to me. And I think it's appealing to most clients. Or
what you talked about at the beginning,
days,
how has the world changed?
Yeah.
We have come to really value experiences. We've come to really value connection. And I think we've come to really value community. And so it's not just me talking about Nextdoor, it's talking about our values at Nextdoor, thankfully matching some of those values that are emerging in the world.
Agreed. I want to get on in a bit into kind of what the future is for Nextdoor, but just one thing which I think is interesting. So you talked earlier on about, you said local is a strategy. And I think broadly, I would probably agree with you. I think anybody who is looking for advocacy, who is encouraging people to have in real world experiences, all those kind of things, being local is a really smart thing to do. There's one thing which I think is potentially interesting that makes local a strategy that doesn't come from that community sense. So at some point cookies are going to die. I think we're all beginning to accept that surveillance from an advertising perspective, people don't really like. It's not a great experience. Are you seeing that kind of play out, that people are kind of moving to a more local world and being kind of more zip code focused, because that's actually a way of being quite targeted and sort of feeling personal to a local community? Is that a thing that you're kind of seeing come through?
Well, there's that old expression that if the product is free, you as the customer are the one paying, right? And so I think we have, from the very beginning, from the inception of the company in 2010, we have said we're going to be a membership platform where to come to Nextdoor, you can't do a Google search and find the content. We don't really care about the cookie, because when you join Nextdoor, you have to tell us where you live. And when you go through the sign-up flow, you will tell us things. Do you have children? What are the kinds of things that you like? And based on that, we can give you advertising that is not inferred based on some cookie or some data that's following you around the internet, but based on explicit signals that you've given us. So from the very beginning, we have believed that privacy and protecting that privacy for our users is paramount. And that was before all of the recent trends. Now, the world is changing significantly. If you think of both the trend away from the cookies and towards AI. We are moving into a completely different world where the ability to target is going to become better through technology. That's AI, right? But users' availability or their preferences around sharing that information is going to go down. And so we feel like with Nextdoor, because you opt into a community and because we can both explicitly know when you join what you like and infer from the overall community's tastes what kinds of things you might like, we feel like we don't have to cross the line and make you uncomfortable by saying, we need to find out this, that, and the other thing about you.
The uncomfortable thing is, I think, a really interesting, one of the things we talk about a bit is this idea that actually, we talk about geo keys, but location, community, interchangeable kind of concepts, right, to some extent. And I think it's one of the things that can actually help clients kind of make the media plans less creepy. People don't like being followed around. It feels unsettling. But actually, being followed around by something that is in my local community that I've given consent to, same outcome, totally different user experience.
Well,
right?
there's another piece of it. On most of the social media platforms, folks are being targeted on an individual basis. And that individual basis is based on the cookie or based on the click pattern or based on other signals that have been inferred, right? For Nextdoor, most of the time, you can buy based on a community. So you're not buying based on an individual and that individual's tastes. You are saying, we believe that our product is well suited for this part of the world, this part of America, this part of the UK, this part of wherever Nextdoor exists. And so from that standpoint, you're not having to go down to the personal level and saying, we are looking for something that this person needs. How do we best target that? You're saying, we know that this is a region where people are more inclined to like this kind of product. And so I think there's a safe distance there. Now, at the end of the day, it has to perform. And so Nextdoor is performant, but it can be performant in a way that's not nearly creepy.
Right. And I think that, and I'm completely with you on this. I think finding a way that we can deliver the performance without that sense of people being unsettled and uncomfortable by us harvesting, I think that's a really powerful place to play. So I've got two final things I want to talk about. First one is I'm just interested. It feels like if Nextdoor hadn't existed 14 years ago, all the things that have happened over the past maybe 5 or 6 years, we're talking community, local, a way of targeting without, it feels like somebody would have created Nextdoor. It actually feels like, weirdly, the story of Nextdoor is 14 years is not old, but it feels like it's a very fresh, very relevant story. How have you kind of kept it? And I guess two questions. How have you kept it feeling relevant? And then what's next for Nextdoor?
I think if you're lucky enough to play in the world of community, hopefully 14 years from now, it'll still be very relevant. What needs to evolve is the product itself. And so the mission, the goal, the philosophy of building local community, I think that's timeless. I think that is literally something you can go back a couple hundred years and it would be very relevant, and hopefully it will be the same a couple hundred years from now. The way that we build that local community, that's what's changed. And so we need to be on the cutting edge of embracing all the tools and technologies that everyone in the world is now embracing to do those things. I think it's one thing to say social media is all bad. It's another thing to say social media can be a lever to build real connections and real community. That's the tack that we've taken, right? As we look towards the future in the next 14 years, we know that AI is going to emerge. So how can we use AI in a way to enrich our local existences? That's something we think about all the time. And when I was gone for the last 5 years, one of the things I did is the last couple of years, I've looked at a lot of AI deals as an investor. And so to have more of a horizontal point of view after for 9 years as the CEO, having a very vertical one, it's been really valuable because I've come back and I've said, you know what? AI can actually be a really valuable thing, even in the context of Nextdoor. Imagine if you had a local assistant that when you asked it for, I'm thinking about living in this neighborhood, tell me some of the things that I should know about living in this area, right? And the AI assistant could tell you, right? The same way that you ask your neighbors today. So we're very excited about the future. Ultimately, the goal of building local community, that strikes us as a timeless one. The way we do that, it has to evolve and it has to get better.
Yeah, and I said I didn't have any more questions. I have one more question because you mentioned about AI investment, and you were a shark on Shark Tank.
Yes.
What was? I mean, that must have been amazing. What was the
great privilege?
What was the best thing you saw, or what was the best thing you saw that you didn't invest in?
There was actually an amazing company that got $1 million investment from one of the sharks because it was using AI to scan the face and then create a model for swim goggles that were completely bespoke. So instead of buying the generic goggles, you would actually scan your face with an app on your iPhone, and it would then build for you a pair of goggles for roughly the same price as a normal pair of goggles, but completely suited to your face. Now the funny thing is, after the show ended, I pursued the company and managed to make an investment after that as well. So that's a company that has 3 of the sharks invested in it now. But I have to tell you, being on Shark Tank, incredible privilege, and particularly for me, because not only have I been a shark now, I've actually been in the entrepreneur's shoes. Nextdoor is the 3rd company that I've started, and so that feeling of anxiety as the entrepreneur walks in and sees the sharks, right? The feeling of when you enter the Shark Tank, that's something that I've not just been a shark, I've been one of the guppies, right?
That's amazing.
It was fun.
That is absolutely amazing. Okay, one final thing, and then I promise I will shush. If you were talking to a big global advertiser, what one piece of advice would you give them to work brilliantly with Nextdoor?
I think for sure local is a strategy. And if you start with local as a strategy and you aspire to ultimately building community, Nextdoor is unique, differentiated, and will perform.
Amazing. Nirav, thank you so much. Thank you for coming on and talking to us.
It's great to be in Cannes, and I appreciate the time.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Have a good week.